The sun shone brightly over London, casting a golden hue on its historic streets. Tourists flocked to the heart of the city, their chatter mingling with the rumble of buses and the occasional hum of a passing black cab. Amid the bustling crowd was Daniel, a young man with Down syndrome whose wide-eyed enthusiasm brought a unique energy to the day. Beside him walked Emma, his older sister, guiding him through the city with a steady hand and a soft smile. Daniel, 22, adored adventures. His curiosity knew no bounds, and Emma had promised him that their trip to London would be nothing short of extraordinary. True to her word, she led him from the iconic Tower Bridge to the charm of Covent Garden, pausing now and then to let him soak in the details of their surroundings. But the real excitement of the day awaited them at Buckingham Palace. As they approached the palace gates, the grandeur of the scene unfolded before them. The ornate golden railings glistened in the sunlight, and the rhythmic clatter of cameras filled the air. Daniel paused, his eyes widening in amazement. Beyond the gates, the imposing facade of Buckingham Palace stood like a symbol of timelessness, its regal beauty amplified by the clear skies. Yet, what caught Daniel's attention was not the palace itself, but the Queen's Guard stationed in front. Among the red-tunicked soldiers stood Corporal Stanley Donner. Tall and unflinching, he was the epitome of discipline. His face, set in an expression of unwavering focus, showed no trace of emotion, and his black bearskin cap added to the imposing aura. Every movement he made, precisely calculated and deliberate, was a testament to his years of service and the weight of tradition he bore. For Stanley, this role was more than a job, it was an honor. The Queen's Guard fascinated Daniel. Their vibrant uniforms, their stillness, their ceremonial grandeur, everything about them seemed almost otherworldly. As Emma explained the significance of their role, Daniel's interest only grew. His gaze locked on Corporal Donner, who stood motionless, seemingly unaware of the throngs of tourists surrounding him. Daniel's admiration quickly turned into action. He stepped closer to the gates, his focus entirely on the guard. Pointing at him, Daniel called his sister, giggling like a child, his voice carrying above the chatter of the crowd. Emma gently placed a hand on his arm, sensing his growing excitement. She insisted that they shouldn't go close, hoping to keep him from venturing further, but her words barely registered. Daniel's fascination deepened with each passing second. The guardsman's stillness seemed almost magical to him, a feat of discipline that he couldn't quite understand but deeply admired. The tourists around them shifted positions, snapping pictures and pointing excitedly at the changing of the guard, which was about to begin. But Daniel remained rooted, his attention fixed solely on Corporal Donner. Emma watched him carefully, knowing her brother's adventurous spirit all too well. Suddenly, Daniel took a step closer to the gates. Emma's heart skipped a beat as she called out to him, her tone gentle yet firm. But Daniel was captivated, his curiosity overriding her words. He wanted a closer look at the soldier who stood so still, so composed amidst the chaos of the crowd. Corporal Donner, though seemingly oblivious to his surroundings, was trained to notice even the subtlest movements. Out of the corner of his eye he caught sight of Daniel's approach. Years of experience taught him to remain focused, but something about the young man's earnest fascination struck a chord within him. Though Donner's expression didn't change, a small, unspoken awareness passed between the two, a fleeting connection that neither could articulate. Emma, meanwhile, moved quickly to Daniel's side, her concern mounting. She placed a hand on his shoulder, urging him to stay back, her voice steady but tinged with worry. yet Daniel's feet seemed to have a will of their own. The suspense hung thick in the air as Daniel inched closer to the gates, his every movement watched not only by Emma, but by the growing crowd of tourists. The lively atmosphere seemed to fade into the background, replaced by an almost tangible tension. Would he step too close? Would the guards react? Emma's grip on his shoulder tightened as she prepared to guide him back, her heart racing with anticipation. The air around Buckingham Palace grew thick with anticipation as Daniel stood at the edge of the crowd, his gaze locked on Corporal Stanley Donner. The moment seemed suspended, the usual noise of London receding into an almost eerie quiet. Tourists who had previously been focused on capturing the perfect photograph now shifted their attention to the young man whose curiosity defied the unspoken boundaries of the scene. Daniel took another step forward, his movements deliberate yet innocent, his fascination undeterred by Emma's gentle efforts to hold him back. The crowd watched, a mix of intrigue and hesitation rippling through them like a silent wave. All eyes now rested on the unfolding moment between the spirited young man and the stoic guard. Corporal Donner, trained to withstand distractions and maintain his unyielding stance, felt the energy shift. Despite his years of disciplined service, he found himself instinctively aware of Daniel's approach. His body remained motionless, but something in his expression, a barely perceptible softening, hinted that this encounter was unlike any he had experienced before. Daniel, with his characteristic warmth, approached the towering soldier. His steps were unhurried, almost as if he were savoring the gravity of the moment. The rich red of Stanley's uniform, the polished buttons and the imposing bearskin cap captivated him. As he neared the immovable figure, Daniel extended his hand in a gesture so genuine it disarmed the tension in the air. The crowd collectively held its breath. Tourists leaned in closer, their cameras momentarily forgotten. The murmur of hushed voices speculating on what might happen next added to the suspense. Everyone knew the guards were famed for their discipline, their refusal to react to even the most audacious attempts to distract them. Would this be any different? For a moment, Stanley Donner remained still, his unbroken posture signaling his unwavering dedication to the role. Yet, just as the crowd began to assume that Daniel's attempt would be met with the usual stoicism, something subtle changed. Stanley's gaze flickered downward, ever so briefly, to meet Daniel's outstretched hand. It was a gesture so faint that many in the crowd weren't sure if they had imagined it, but to those paying close attention, it spoke volumes. Emma, standing just a few feet behind her brother, felt her heart race. She wanted to pull him back, worried that his actions might cross a line, but her instincts told her to wait. Her protective nature battled with the realization that this moment was special to Daniel, perhaps even to the guard. Her mind raced with the potential consequences of letting things play out, but her feet stayed rooted to the spot. Daniel smiled brightly, his hand unwavering as he continued to offer it to the guard. The sincerity of his gesture was unmistakable, a simple yet profound connection that ignored the formalities and rigid traditions of the scene. The murmurs in the crowd grew louder, a mix of awe and disbelief. Some people whispered that the guard might actually respond, while others argued that it was impossible. Stanley, though bound by the weight of his duty, felt an unexplainable pull toward the young man before him. His years of service had exposed him to countless faces, countless moments of attempted distraction, but none had carried the same purity and unfiltered admiration as this one. Without breaking form entirely, he allowed his eyes to rest on Daniel for a moment longer than regulation might allow. The subtle acknowledgement didn't go unnoticed. A collective gasp rippled through the onlookers, the atmosphere electric with disbelief. Daniel, undeterred by the guard's otherwise stiff demeanor, continued to stand his ground, his outstretched hand a silent plea for connection. Emma shifted nervously, her hands clasped tightly as she struggled with whether to intervene. She was acutely aware of the unspoken rules surrounding the Queen's Guard, and the last thing she wanted was to disrupt their duty or put Daniel in a difficult position. Yet, as she watched the interaction unfold, she couldn't deny that it carried a sense of significance she didn't fully understand. The crowd seemed to echo her hesitation, their whispers urging her to let the moment take its course. Strangers exchanged knowing glances, silently agreeing that this was a moment worth witnessing, even if it bent the usual expectations of a visit to Buckingham Palace. Some tourists held up their cameras, unsure whether to capture what felt like an intimate exchange. Daniel, unaware of the growing tension, remained steadfast. His outstretched hand wavered slightly, not from doubt, but from the sheer effort of holding it still for so long. The simplicity of his gesture, the purity of his intentions, seemed to resonate not only with Corporal Donner, but also with the crowd. It was as if, in that brief moment, the rigid boundaries of tradition and duty blurred, replaced by something far more human. Emma stepped forward instinctively, her concern for Daniel overcoming her hesitation. But, as she moved closer, the murmurs of the crowd grew louder, almost as if they were collectively willing her to pause. She hesitated, torn between her protective instincts and the unspoken encouragement of the strangers around her. The suspense reached its peak as Daniel's hand remained extended, his unwavering determination silently asking the question that everyone else was too afraid to voice. Would the guard break his routine? The air buzzed with expectation, the outcome hanging in a delicate balance that seemed to stretch on for eternity. For what felt like an eternity, the world around Buckingham Palace stood still. Daniel's extended hand, unwavering and filled with pure intent, seemed to hold the attention of every soul gathered there. Corporal Stanley Donner, immovable for so long, remained a pillar of discipline. Yet something unseen shifted in the air, a ripple that suggested a breach in the rigid veneer of his duty. And then, to everyone's astonishment, Stanley bent ever so slightly. His towering frame dipped just enough to acknowledge the young man before him. The move was subtle, measured, and unmistakably deliberate, staying within the boundaries of his protocol. But what truly captured the crowd's attention was the faint smile that flickered across his otherwise stoic face. It was fleeting yet deeply meaningful, a moment of connection that transcended the ceremonial barriers that defined his role. The crowd reacted almost audibly, gasps rippling through the spectators as they watched the interaction unfold. Emma felt her breath catch, her initial concern melting into a swell of relief and pride. Daniel's innocence and determination had somehow pierced the guarded world of tradition and duty, creating a moment that would linger in the memories of everyone who witnessed it. Stanley, lowering his gaze toward Daniel, whispered softly, his words barely audible to anyone but the boy in front of him. His voice, steady and low, carried a warmth that contrasted sharply with his disciplined exterior. Whatever he said was brief but enough to light up Daniel's face with an expression of pure joy. His smile was wide and unrestrained, his excitement radiating outward in a way that seemed to touch every person in the crowd. Emma instinctively reached for her phone, capturing the moment in a photograph that would become one of her most treasured memories. She could feel the pride swelling within her, not just for Daniel's bravery, but for the humanity in the soldier who had acknowledged her brother in a way she never expected. As the scene unfolded, a quiet reflection stirred within Stanley. Beneath his disciplined exterior lay a past that few knew. Memories of his younger years came rushing back in fragments, filling the quiet space in his mind as he continued to hold his composure. Stanley had grown up in a small village, far removed from the grandeur of Buckingham Palace. His family had always been close-knit, with Stanley often taking on the role of protector and guide for his younger brother, Liam. Liam, like Daniel, had Down syndrome. He was a source of endless joy and inspiration for Stanley, teaching him the importance of patience, empathy, and resilience. Growing up, Stanley often found himself balancing the responsibilities of school and helping Liam navigate a world that didn't always understand him. He remembered the times he would sit with Liam for hours, helping him learn to tie his shoes or complete a puzzle, his brother's determination mirroring the same resolve he now saw in Daniel. Those moments of quiet persistence shaped Stanley into the man he was today. When Stanley decided to join the Queen's Guard, it was Liam who had been his greatest cheerleader. Despite his limited understanding of the intricacies of military life, Liam beamed with pride every time Stanley donned his uniform. For Stanley, every day in service was a tribute to his brother, a way of honoring the lessons of love and strength that Liam had unknowingly imparted. As Stanley stood at his post once more, his thoughts lingered on Daniel's innocent smile and the fleeting moment they had shared. It was rare for the rigid discipline of his position to give way to personal reflection, but Daniel's presence had stirred something deeply buried within him. The boy's determination and purity mirrored memories of Liam, his younger brother, whose laughter and resilience had once been the light of Stanley's life. The weight of duty and emotion often collided for Stanley, though he rarely allowed it to show. Being a member of the Queen's Guard demanded unwavering focus, a stoic demeanor, and the ability to suppress personal feelings. Yet, those requirements became harder to fulfill after Liam passed away. Stanley had always seen his brother as the heart of their family, a beacon of unconditional love and acceptance. Losing him had left a void that even the prestige of his role couldn't fill. The regiment's strict routines became both a comfort and a burden. The precision and discipline of his duties provided structure, but they also served as a constant reminder of the emotional restraint he had to maintain. In the quiet moments between shifts, Stanley often found himself revisiting memories of Liam, helping him tie his shoes, cheering him on during school plays, or simply sitting together in peaceful silence. Those memories were bittersweet, a source of both solace and pain. After Liam's passing, Stanley had thrown himself into his role, finding purpose in the pride his brother had once shown for his uniform. Yet, there were days when the ceremonial grandeur felt hollow, the applause of tourists and the clicking of cameras a stark contrast to the quieter, more meaningful connections he longed for. Moments like the one with Daniel were rare, but profound, a reminder of why he had chosen this path in the first place. As the day wore on and the crowd at Buckingham Palace began to disperse, Stanley completed his shift with the same unyielding precision that defined his role. Once his replacement arrived, he stepped away from his post, his mind still occupied by the encounter. He removed his bearskin hat, the weight of it symbolic of the burdens he carried, and made his way toward the barracks, ready to retreat into solitude. But before he could leave the area entirely, a soft voice called out to him. Turning, he saw Emma standing a short distance away, her expression a mixture of gratitude and hesitation. She had waited for the right moment, wanting to thank him for the kindness he had shown her brother. Approaching him, Emma expressed her heartfelt appreciation, explaining how much the moment had meant to Daniel and how it had transformed their visit to London. Her voice trembled slightly, her emotions raw, as she recounted how difficult it often was for Daniel to feel truly seen and valued. Stanley listened intently, his usual stoicism softened by her words. Though his face remained composed, he felt a deep connection to what she was saying. When she mentioned how Daniel's joy had reminded her of the bond they shared as siblings, Stanley's own memories of Liam resurfaced with striking clarity. Carefully, he shared a brief glimpse into his own story, revealing how much Daniel's determination had reminded him of his late brother. He spoke of Liam's unwavering spirit and the lessons he had learned from him, his words carrying a quiet sincerity that touched Emma deeply. Though the conversation was brief, it was enough to bridge the gap between two strangers who had been brought together by an unspoken understanding. As Emma turned to rejoin Daniel, who was waiting nearby with a wide smile, Stanley watched them go, his heart heavy yet oddly lighter than it had felt in years. The moment had not only given Daniel and Emma a memory they would cherish, but it also offered Stanley a rare sense of peace. In Daniel, he had seen a reflection of Liam, a reminder that the love and lessons of those we lose remain with us, shaping who we are and how we connect with others. It began with a single video. Emma, still glowing with pride and relief after the day's events, decided to share the brief clip she had captured of Daniel and Corporal Stanley Donner. She uploaded it to social media, adding a short caption about the kindness of a Queen's Guard and the pure determination of her brother. She hadn't expected much, perhaps a few likes and kind words from friends and family. What she didn't anticipate was the ripple effect the video would have. Within hours, the post began to gain traction. The clip, though short, captured the heartwarming moment when Stanley bent slightly toward Daniel, nodding with a rare but unmistakable smile. It was a fleeting exchange, but one that spoke volumes. The contrast between the rigid discipline of Stanley's role and his gentle acknowledgement of Daniel's innocent gesture resonated deeply with viewers. Comments began pouring in, praising both Daniel's bravery and Stanley's humanity. As the video spread, news outlets took notice. Headlines like "The Queen's Guard Who Broke Tradition for a Special Boy" and "A Touching Moment at Buckingham Palace" started to appear online. Journalists sought Emma for interviews, eager to learn more about the story behind the viral clip. At first, Emma was hesitant. She didn't want the focus to shift from the genuine moment that had unfolded between her brother and Stanley. But after some thought, she agreed, realizing that sharing their story could inspire others. Daniel, meanwhile, was blissfully unaware of the growing buzz surrounding him. To him, the highlight of his day remained the encounter with the nice guard. He spent the next few days recounting the moment to Emma with uncontainable excitement, his face lighting up every time he mimicked Stanley's subtle nod. For Daniel, it wasn't about the cameras, the crowd, or the unexpected fame. It was about the connection he had felt, a rare and beautiful acknowledgement of his presence in a world that often overlooked him. Not everyone, however, viewed the moment with the same warmth. As the story gained momentum, some critics began questioning whether Stanley had overstepped his duties by breaking protocol. Discussions emerged on social media and news panels, debating the balance between tradition and humanity. Some argued that the Queen's Guard's role demanded absolute adherence to tradition, while others praised Stanley for showing compassion in a way that upheld the true spirit of service. The palace, known for its careful diplomacy, released a neutral statement acknowledging the event without taking a definitive stance. They emphasized the importance of the Queen's Guard's role in representing tradition and discipline, but subtly commended the values of kindness and respect that had been displayed. The statement did little to quell the debate, but added an air of formality to the unfolding story. Stanley, for his part, found himself thrust into a spotlight he had never sought. Accustomed to the anonymity of his role, he now faced a flood of attention from reporters, colleagues, and even strangers who recognized him from the video. While he appreciated the positive responses, he found the scrutiny overwhelming. He had acted on instinct, guided by the memories of his brother Liam and the simple humanity he saw in Daniel. To him, it wasn't about breaking protocol, but about honoring a connection that transcended the rigid boundaries of his role. Emma, too, found herself navigating uncharted territory. She fielded calls and messages from people around the world, many of whom shared their own stories of kindness and connection. Parents of children with special needs reached out, expressing gratitude for the way Daniel's determination and Stanley's response had shed light on the value of inclusion. Emma felt a deep sense of responsibility to represent her brother's story authentically, ensuring that the narrative remained true to the moment that had sparked it all. Despite the whirlwind of attention, Daniel's life remained largely unchanged. He continued to explore London with Emma, his enthusiasm for the city's sights and sounds undiminished. He spoke often of Stanley, referring to him as his friend at the palace. His joy was infectious, a reminder to Emma that, at its core, the story was about something far simpler than the media frenzy it had become. The video's impact extended beyond social media and news headlines. Donations began pouring into organizations supporting individuals with Down syndrome, as viewers were moved to make a difference in honor of Daniel and Stanley's interaction. Advocacy groups used the moment to highlight the importance of empathy and inclusion, sparking meaningful conversations about how society could better support individuals with special needs. For Stanley, the experience became a turning point. The attention forced him to confront the emotions he had long buried following Liam's death. He found solace in the letters and messages he received from strangers who shared their own stories of loss, love, and resilience. Slowly, he began to view the moment not as a breach of duty, but as a tribute to his brother's memory, a way of carrying forward the lessons Liam had taught him. The call came unexpectedly. Emma had been sorting through the steady stream of messages from friends and strangers alike when her phone buzzed with a number she didn't recognize. On the other end was a polite voice, identifying themselves as a representative of Buckingham Palace. The palace, they explained, had taken notice of the impact Daniel and Stanley's story had created. To honor the positive attention it had garnered and the conversations it had sparked, the palace wished to extend a private invitation to Emma and Daniel for an exclusive tour. Emma was stunned. While she had hoped the story would inspire others, she hadn't imagined it would catch the attention of the royal household. She immediately thought of Daniel, whose face would undoubtedly light up at the idea of stepping inside the palace he had admired from the gates. Accepting the invitation with gratitude, Emma knew she would need to prepare Daniel for the occasion, ensuring he understood the significance of the event. In the days leading up to the tour, Emma spoke to Daniel often about what to expect. She explained that the visit was a special opportunity, one not given to many people, and that he would need to be on his best behavior. Daniel listened intently, nodding with an eagerness that only deepened Emma's resolve to make the day as memorable as possible. She wanted him to feel the weight of the moment, but also to enjoy it as only he could, with pure, unfiltered joy. When the day arrived, Emma dressed Daniel in his best outfit, carefully smoothing down his shirt and adjusting his tie. She couldn't help but feel a swell of pride as she looked at him, standing tall and beaming with excitement. For a brief moment, she thought of her parents, who had always believed in Daniel's potential. They would have been so proud to see him recognized in such a way. Arriving at the palace, Emma and Daniel were greeted warmly by staff who escorted them inside. The grandeur of the palace was overwhelming, even to Emma, who had seen pictures but had never imagined being within its walls. Daniel, however, was utterly mesmerized. His eyes darted from the towering ceilings to the ornate details on the walls, his mouth slightly agape as he took in the splendor around him. To Emma's surprise, Stanley was waiting for them, dressed casually rather than in his imposing guard uniform. The decision to allow him to meet them out of uniform had been deliberate, ensuring that the interaction could be personal rather than formal. Stanley's face softened when he saw Daniel, who immediately recognized him as the nice guard. Without hesitation, Daniel rushed forward, extending his hand just as he had done at the gates. This time, Stanley clasped it warmly, his usual stoicism replaced by a genuine smile. The interaction was brief but heartfelt, with Stanley thanking Emma for sharing their story and expressing how much it had meant to him. He spoke quietly, recounting how the viral moment had not only brought joy to others, but had also helped him reconnect with his own memories of Liam. Emma felt a lump rise in her throat as she listened, realizing just how deeply the encounter had affected Stanley. The tour continued, with Daniel marveling at every room and hallway they entered. The staff patiently answered his many questions, their initial formality giving way to smiles at his infectious enthusiasm. The highlight of the visit came when they were informed that a representative of the royal family wished to meet them. Emma's heart raced at the news, unsure of what to expect but determined to make the most of the opportunity. The representative, a senior member of the royal household, greeted them with warmth and curiosity, expressing admiration for Daniel's bravery and the positive message his story had sent to the world. Daniel, ever the charmer, responded with his signature blend of enthusiasm and sincerity. He spoke about how much he had enjoyed meeting Stanley and how happy he was to be inside the palace. His natural charisma seemed to disarm even the most seasoned members of the royal staff, who found themselves laughing and nodding along as he spoke. For Emma, the moment felt surreal. She had always believed in Daniel's ability to touch lives, but to see it unfold on such a grand stage was almost overwhelming. As they wrapped up their visit, the representative assured Emma that their story had left a lasting impression within the palace. They thanked her for highlighting the importance of compassion and inclusion, noting how rare and precious such moments were in the modern world. Stanley sat quietly in the palace gardens, away from the ceremonial hustle that usually defined his days. The recent encounter with Daniel had been transformative, awakening a part of himself he had long kept hidden. When he first saw Daniel at the gates, it had been like seeing a reflection of his younger brother, Liam. The same spark of determination and joy lit up Daniel's face, stirring memories that had grown dim with time. As the private tour neared its conclusion, Stanley requested a moment alone with Daniel. It was uncharacteristic for someone in his position to make such a request, but the palace staff, recognizing the significance of the situation, granted it. Emma, though initially hesitant, trusted Stanley's intentions and allowed the two to sit together on a bench in the gardens. Stanley began to speak softly, recounting the bond he had shared with Liam. He described how Liam's laughter could fill a room, how his boundless curiosity had often led them on small adventures in their village, and how his unwavering spirit had taught him the value of perseverance. Liam had been his guiding light, his reminder that life's greatest joys often came in the simplest moments. As Stanley shared these memories, he found himself smiling, a rare, genuine expression of warmth. He spoke of the challenges, too, of how the world had often been unkind to Liam, failing to see past his condition to the remarkable person he was. Stanley admitted that he had joined the Queen's Guard because of his brother, carrying Liam's lessons of resilience and love into every aspect of his life. Daniel listened intently, his bright eyes fixed on Stanley, as though he understood the depth of what was being shared. Though Daniel couldn't articulate it in the same way, his presence was enough. It was as if Liam's spirit lived on through him, bridging the gap between two strangers who were now bound by an unspoken understanding. Emma watched from a distance, her heart swelling with pride and gratitude. She reflected on how Daniel had shaped her own life, making her more patient, compassionate, and attuned to the beauty in small, everyday moments. Growing up with Daniel had not been without its challenges, but those challenges had been eclipsed by the rewards. His way of seeing the world, pure, joyful, and unfiltered, had taught her to appreciate life's blessings in a way she never could have otherwise. After that day, an unlikely friendship blossomed between Stanley and Daniel. Though their lives were vastly different, they found ways to stay connected. Stanley began writing letters to Daniel, sharing stories of his days at the palace and asking about Daniel's adventures back home. Daniel, with Emma's help, would excitedly reply, recounting everything from his favorite meals to his latest discoveries during their travels. Occasionally, when Emma and Daniel visited London, they would meet Stanley for tea or a stroll through the city. These meetings became cherished moments for both men. For Daniel, it was a chance to spend time with his palace friend, as he fondly called Stanley. For Stanley, it was an opportunity to reconnect with the part of himself that Liam had nurtured, a reminder that the values his brother had instilled in him were as relevant as ever. The story of their friendship continued to inspire others. Stanley, once a quiet and reserved figure, found himself thrust into the spotlight. Media outlets reached out, eager to hear his perspective on the now viral encounter. Initially hesitant, Stanley realized he could use his newfound platform for good. He began speaking publicly about the importance of inclusion and awareness for people with Down syndrome. In interviews and at events, Stanley shared stories of Liam and Daniel, emphasizing the unique gifts they brought to the world. He spoke about the need for greater understanding and support, urging society to see beyond stereotypes and recognize the potential in everyone. His words resonated with audiences, sparking conversations and driving initiatives aimed at creating a more inclusive world. Stanley also worked with advocacy groups, lending his voice to campaigns that championed the rights and well-being of individuals with Down syndrome. He visited schools, participated in charity events, and even collaborated on programs designed to foster greater acceptance and integration. Each step felt like a way of honoring Liam's memory while celebrating the impact Daniel had on his life. For Emma, watching Stanley's transformation was both humbling and inspiring. She saw how a single moment, a simple gesture at the palace gates, had grown into something far larger than any of them could have imagined. It was a testament to the power of human connection and the ripple effect of kindness. The video of Daniel and Stanley's meeting at the palace had done more than just capture the hearts of people worldwide. It had become a catalyst, sparking conversations about Down syndrome and the importance of inclusion. Emma, inspired by the wave of support and recognition, decided to take action. With Stanley's encouragement, she launched a campaign aimed at raising awareness about Down syndrome, focusing on the positive impact individuals with the condition could have on the world. The campaign, which Emma called Inclusion Begins With Us, quickly gained traction. She shared the video of Daniel's encounter with Stanley on various platforms, along with heartfelt messages encouraging people to be more open and accepting. The video, which had already gone viral, now became the cornerstone of her advocacy efforts. Emma used her personal story as a backdrop, explaining how her life had been shaped by Daniel's presence, teaching her patience, compassion, and resilience. Stanley, once a quiet figure behind his uniform, stepped into the spotlight, eager to lend his voice to the cause. He had always believed in the importance of duty and discipline, but now he saw the power in using his platform to make a difference. With each public appearance, he shared his journey, how Daniel had reminded him of his late brother, Liam, and how he had learned to view the world through a more compassionate lens. Stanley's authenticity and humility resonated deeply with those who heard him speak. His words became a rallying cry for a world that had long been set in its ways, urging people to break free from preconceived notions and embrace the value of inclusion. Emma and Stanley attended numerous charity events, speaking at schools, community centers, and corporate offices. They were often invited to share their experiences and shed light on the challenges individuals with Down syndrome faced. At one event, Stanley spoke to a room full of students, telling them about the joy and strength he had witnessed in Daniel and Liam. He explained how the world often underestimated people like them, and how he had come to realize that the true strength lay in their ability to love and inspire others, despite the barriers society often placed before them. The room was filled with a sense of quiet contemplation, and many students left with a new understanding of Down syndrome, eager to be more inclusive in their own lives. Daniel, for his part, remained blissfully unaware of the campaign's growing momentum. To him, life was still about enjoying the little things, his walks in the park, his visits to the palace, and, most of all, his friendship with Stanley. He continued to speak with boundless enthusiasm about his friend at the palace, unaware that his simple, joyful spirit had become a symbol of hope and courage for so many others. His infectious optimism spread to everyone he met, from event attendees to those who watched the campaign unfold online. Emma often found herself in awe of how much impact Daniel had made without even trying. She had always known him to be special, but seeing him become an icon for a cause was both humbling and inspiring. His charm, his unrelenting joy, and his ability to bring people together had turned him into more than just her brother. He had become a symbol of what was possible when society chose to see people for who they truly were, rather than reducing them to labels. As the campaign grew, more and more people came forward to share their stories. Families with children who had Down syndrome sent letters and videos, thanking Emma and Stanley for their advocacy and for giving them hope. The ripple effect was undeniable. Communities began holding events to raise awareness, organizations saw an increase in donations, and schools started implementing programs to teach students about diversity and inclusion. The campaign had become a movement, one that was no longer confined to the video of a single encounter at the palace gates. One day, Emma received a letter from a mother whose son had Down syndrome. The mother explained that her son had always felt isolated and misunderstood, but after seeing Daniel's story, he felt empowered for the first time in his life. The letter was a simple message, but it carried immense weight. It reminded Emma of why they were doing this work, because real lives were being touched, real people were finding the courage to be seen, and real change was happening. Stanley, too, was moved by the response. The letters, the messages, the stories of hope, it all reinforced why he had decided to lend his voice to this cause. He had never imagined that his moment with Daniel, something that felt so small at the time, would snowball into something that could truly change lives. He had grown accustomed to wearing his uniform with pride, but now he wore his advocacy with the same sense of duty, knowing that every speech, every interview, every meeting brought them one step closer to a more inclusive world. Together, Emma and Stanley continued to push forward. They spoke at conferences, met with policymakers, and worked with schools to create curricula that emphasized empathy and acceptance. They shared their personal stories, but also brought attention to the structural changes needed to support individuals with Down syndrome, more accessible education, better health care, and greater opportunities for meaningful employment. Through it all, Daniel remained the heart of the campaign. His story had been the spark, but it was his joy, his ability to see the world through a lens of optimism, that had become the driving force. In him, people saw the potential for a world that was kinder, more accepting, and more willing to embrace the differences that made each of us unique. The day Emma received the letter was one she would never forget. It arrived with an elegant golden seal on the envelope, the kind she had only ever seen on television. Her heart skipped a beat as she carefully opened it, knowing that this was no ordinary piece of correspondence. The letter was from Buckingham Palace. Inside, the words were simple yet profound, written in the Queen's unmistakable hand. The letter expressed her admiration for Daniel's bravery and kindness, commending his courage in approaching Stanley at the palace gates. It was a quiet acknowledgment of the power of small acts of compassion, a reminder that even the most modest gestures could make the world a better place. Emma read the letter over and over again, her emotions a mixture of awe and disbelief. To think that Daniel, a boy with Down syndrome, had made such an impact on the Queen herself was nothing short of extraordinary. Emma couldn't help but marvel at the journey they had been on, from that simple interaction at the palace gates to receiving a letter from the monarch of the United Kingdom. It felt surreal. The letter wasn't just a personal message to Daniel. It was a signal of something much larger. A few days after it arrived, Buckingham Palace issued a statement announcing the launch of a new initiative aimed at supporting individuals with disabilities. The program, which would focus on inclusion, accessibility, and empowerment, had been inspired by Daniel's story. The palace outlined plans to partner with various charities and organizations to create more opportunities for people with disabilities, from education to employment. The announcement sent ripples through the media and sparked conversations around the world about how societies could do more to create equal opportunities for everyone. For Emma, the announcement was the culmination of everything they had worked for. She had always known that Daniel's story had the potential to change lives, but she had never imagined it would reach such heights. The fact that Buckingham Palace had taken such a meaningful step to create change only reinforced the power of their campaign. It was no longer just a movement. It was a catalyst for tangible progress. Daniel, for his part, took the news in stride. Though he was unaware of the full implications of the Queen's letter or the initiative it had inspired, he understood that something important was happening. Emma shared the news with him, and he beamed with pride. He was thrilled that the world was paying attention to kindness and inclusion, but more than anything, he was just happy to know that people were taking his message seriously. For Daniel, life was about making connections, about spreading joy, and the idea that his actions had sparked such a global conversation left him feeling more confident than ever. As the campaign continued to grow, Emma began to notice changes in Daniel. He started speaking at more events, sharing his experiences with a newfound sense of purpose. At first, Emma had been nervous about Daniel speaking in public. He had always been a little shy when it came to big crowds, but now he was eager to stand in front of people, sharing his story and encouraging others to embrace kindness, just as he had done at the palace gates. Each time he spoke, Daniel's confidence seemed to grow. He had always been a boy full of joy, but now there was something more, a quiet strength that came from knowing he was making a difference. His speeches were simple but heartfelt. He spoke about how important it was to be kind to others, to see the good in people, and to never let fear hold you back from reaching out. His words, though not always eloquent, carried a power that captivated everyone in the room. Emma was in awe of how far Daniel had come. She reflected on the journey they had taken, from the initial video that had started it all to the letter from the Queen and the campaign that had brought about real change. She thought back to when Daniel had first been diagnosed with Down syndrome, how uncertain they had both felt about the future. There had been so many challenges, so many questions about what his life would be like. But now, as she watched him speak with such confidence, she realized how much he had taught her. Daniel had shown her what it meant to live with resilience, to face the world not with hesitation but with open arms. He had taught her that love, compassion, and kindness were the most powerful tools we had, and that even in a world that often seemed indifferent, a single act of kindness could spark a wave of change. Emma had always thought of herself as the one guiding Daniel, teaching him how to navigate the world. But in truth, it was Daniel who had been teaching her all along. As the days passed, Emma continued to see the impact of their efforts. More schools and organizations reached out, eager to implement programs that promoted inclusion and awareness. Corporations began to take notice, offering employment opportunities and internships for individuals with disabilities. Emma and Stanley were invited to speak at conferences and roundtables where they shared their personal stories and discussed the importance of changing societal attitudes. And through it all, Daniel remained the beating heart of the movement. He never wavered in his commitment to spreading kindness, to showing the world that people with Down syndrome were capable of so much more than society often gave them credit for. Emma knew that their journey was far from over. There was still much work to be done, but as she looked at Daniel, her brother, her inspiration, she couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. They had started with a simple act of kindness, and now they were changing the world. The Queen's acknowledgement had been a momentous occasion, but Emma knew that it was just the beginning. They had a long road ahead, but with Daniel's unwavering optimism and the support of so many people, there was no limit to what they could accomplish. Stanley's heart ached with the memory of his late brother, Liam. Though time had dulled the pain, the grief was still there, lurking beneath the surface, a reminder of the love he had lost too soon. It was in the quiet moments, when he allowed himself to remember, that the weight of the loss became unbearable. But it was also in those same moments that he found clarity. The clarity to honor Liam in a way that would not only commemorate his life, but also make a difference in the lives of others. Inspired by the compassion Daniel had shown him and the impact their story had on the world, Stanley decided to take action. He established a foundation in Liam's name, one dedicated to supporting families of individuals with Down syndrome. The foundation would provide financial assistance, resources, and support to families navigating the challenges of raising a child with special needs. It would also work to raise awareness, educate the public, and advocate for better policies to ensure that individuals with Down syndrome had access to the same opportunities as everyone else. For Stanley, this was not just a tribute to Liam. It was a way to continue his brother's legacy of kindness, of seeing the good in people, and of fighting for those who needed it most. The foundation was his way of giving back, of ensuring that Liam's memory lived on through every life it touched. As the foundation's launch date approached, Stanley invited Emma and Daniel to attend a fundraising event, a celebration of the foundation's mission and the people who had already supported it. The event would take place at a prestigious venue, one that would bring together influential figures, donors, and advocates. Emma, of course, was thrilled to attend, and Daniel couldn't wait to see Stanley again. The reunion was emotional, but it was also a celebration of everything they had accomplished together. As Daniel entered the room, he immediately spotted Stanley and rushed toward him with open arms. The two embraced, and for a moment it felt as though time had stood still. Stanley's heart swelled with pride as he looked at Daniel, the boy who had changed his life, the boy who had reminded him of the power of kindness. It was a bond like no other, one forged in the most unlikely of places. During the event, Stanley spoke about his brother with a mixture of sadness and gratitude. He shared stories of Liam's love for life, his ability to bring joy to everyone around him, and the ways in which his brother had shaped him into the person he had become. Stanley's voice wavered as he talked about the pain of losing Liam, but there was strength in his words. He knew that through the foundation, through the work they were doing, he was making a difference in Liam's honor. Daniel, ever the optimist, spoke as well. He talked about how proud he was of Stanley and the foundation, how happy he was to be there with his new friend, and how much he loved seeing people come together to support a cause so close to his heart. His words were simple but powerful, and they resonated with everyone in the room. Daniel had become a symbol of hope, of resilience, and of the kind of kindness that had the power to change the world. As the evening wore on, the attendees pledged their support to the foundation. Donations flowed in, and the room buzzed with excitement and determination. Stanley could see the ripple effect of the work they had begun, the way it was inspiring people to take action, to help others, and to believe that together they could create a more inclusive world. In the days that followed, the foundation began to receive national attention. Media outlets covered the event, and stories of the foundation's mission spread far and wide. The world was beginning to take notice of the impact Stanley and Daniel had made, and people were rallying behind the cause. But for Stanley, the greatest reward was not the recognition or the financial support. It was the knowledge that Liam's legacy would live on in every life the foundation touched. It was the quiet moments when he would sit alone and think about his brother, remembering how much he had meant to him and how much he still missed him. But now, there was a sense of peace. Stanley had found a way to honor Liam, to ensure that his memory would not be forgotten. As the months passed, Daniel continued to thrive. His bond with Stanley deepened, and the two became an inseparable team, working together to further the foundation's mission. Daniel's infectious optimism and Stanley's unwavering dedication made them a powerful duo, one that was changing the lives of families all over the world. One evening, as the sun set behind the London skyline, Daniel sat down to write a letter to Stanley. He had been thinking a lot about their friendship and everything they had accomplished together. He wanted to express his gratitude to Stanley for all that he had done for him, for the kindness he had shown, and for the love he had given. In his letter, Daniel thanked Stanley for helping him see the world in a new light, for showing him that his dreams were worth pursuing, and for encouraging him to embrace his own potential. He spoke of his dreams for the future, of wanting to continue advocating for people with Down syndrome, of wanting to travel the world and share his message of kindness and inclusion, and of wanting to help others find the same joy in life that he had found. The letter was simple but heartfelt, a reflection of Daniel's deep appreciation for the man who had become more than a friend. He had become a brother. As Daniel finished writing, he felt a sense of fulfillment, knowing that the work they had started together would continue long after they were gone. Stanley read the letter with tears in his eyes, touched by Daniel's words and the love they shared. He knew that their journey was far from over, that there was still so much work to be done. But in that moment, as he reflected on the bond they had formed, he knew that they had already changed the world in ways they could never have imagined. Stanley sat at his desk, the weight of Daniel's letter resting heavily on his chest. He had read the words over and over, each sentence filling him with a warmth he hadn't known he needed. It was strange, this bond they had formed, a bond that had started with a simple act of kindness at the gates of Buckingham Palace, but had grown into something far more profound. As he picked up his pen to respond, Stanley knew that this letter had to be more than just words on paper. It had to be a promise to Daniel and to himself that the work they had started would never be forgotten. Stanley's hand moved slowly, carefully crafting each sentence. He wanted to make sure Daniel knew how much his words had meant to him. The promise to always support him, to stand by him in his efforts to spread positivity, was one Stanley was determined to keep. He wrote about how proud he was of everything Daniel had accomplished, how his dreams were not only possible, but already taking shape with every step he took. He spoke of the ripple effect Daniel's kindness had sparked, how it had inspired people across the world to reconsider how they viewed others, how it had opened hearts and minds to the power of inclusion. Stanley emphasized that Daniel's story was no longer just his own. It had become a beacon for so many others who had been overlooked or underestimated. Stanley promised to always be there, a constant in Daniel's life, ready to cheer him on as he continued to break barriers and inspire others. When Stanley finished the letter, he felt a sense of peace wash over him. There was no grand gesture or applause, just a quiet understanding between two people who had shared a moment that had changed them both. Stanley knew that Daniel's story would continue to make waves, that it would grow beyond what they had ever imagined. But it wasn't just about the recognition. It was about the lives they had touched, the hearts they had opened. As the years passed, Daniel's story continued to be celebrated in ways Stanley could never have predicted. Each year, annual events were held in Daniel's honor, advocating for inclusion and celebrating the power of kindness. Schools adopted new curriculums focused on empathy, and companies began offering more job opportunities to individuals with Down syndrome. Daniel's infectious optimism and unwavering belief in the goodness of people had ignited a movement, and Stanley had played a crucial part in that. But for Stanley, The most meaningful part was knowing that their work was far from over. He had helped start something, but it was Daniel who had carried it forward with his unrelenting spirit. The movement they had created was only growing, and as long as Daniel kept spreading his message, there was no telling how much more they could accomplish. One crisp autumn morning, Stanley found himself standing once again at the gates of Buckingham Palace. The crowds had gathered for a special event, and though he had seen the palace countless times, today felt different. Today, he was not just the stoic soldier who stood guard. Today, he was someone who had played a part in changing the world. He looked out at the sea of faces, some of whom had come to hear Daniel speak, others simply drawn in by the story of kindness that had touched so many lives. As Stanley watched the crowd, a small smile crept onto his face. He thought back to the day when he had met Daniel, the day when a simple act of kindness had sparked a ripple effect that had changed everything. He remembered the nervous look on Daniel's face, the way his eyes had lit up when Stanley spoke to him, and he remembered the overwhelming sense of pride he had felt when he saw how Daniel's story had touched the world. Standing there, looking at the crowd, Stanley realized that it wasn't just the big moments that mattered. It was the small ones, too. The quiet moments of connection, the simple gestures that had the power to change everything. He had learned that from Daniel, and he would carry that lesson with him for the rest of his life. What are the lessons you got from this video? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for watching and for being part of this journey with us. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories. We'll see you in the next video.